time to become the CEO of your business and life. I'm Jen Godet, a business strategist and life coach. I work with overwhelmed business owners who feel stuck in a rut and depleted. I teach you how to stop doing the things that aren't making you money and start prioritizing the things that bring you energy, joy, and lasting impact. I'm a human performance specialist and an international best-selling author. I've helped countless people all over the world to learn the art of saying no, overcome their fear, and maximize their performance. Let's get you to live your best possible reality. Start today and become the CEO of your business and your life.
Broadcasting live from Houston, from the space city to the world, you are watching NowMedia Television.
Hello and welcome to the NowMedia Television, the first fully bilingual television in the United States, and to the legal show with Natalia and Mac. Mac is currently not here, but I am Natalia Łowska-Czajka, advocate, mediator and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland. And today I'm here in Houston and I'll be connecting with an Italian lawyer now based in Vietnam to cover in this entire episode all the issues that come into your mind when you think about investing in Vietnam and all the legal issues that you might need to solve with someone who knows the reality of the English-speaking culture, but also is able to cover all the issues connected with the localities that are to be found in Vietnam and Singapore. Hello, Federico.
Hello, Natalia, and thank you very much for your very generous presentation. I hope to see Mac soon joining us in the show, and it's great to be back on Legal Talk.
Yes, and it's great to have you back. To our viewers, I would love to remind that Federico has already been with us and presenting some of the issues connected with just generalities of being an international lawyer. And let me please remind you that him being a qualified Italian avvocato, so attorney, decided to continue and grow his business in Vietnam and Singapore. So these parts of Asia are actually his day-to-day place of work. He has his offices developed there. He speaks many languages and therefore is able to serve the clients from all over the world to do the business there. And Federico, for today's show, we first selected the issue of mergers and acquisitions. I do imagine that a lot of people think, oh, it will be good to have a capital investment in a country like Vietnam, it's growing. So what can you tell us about just generalities and things that are expecting the investors when it comes to mergers and acquisitions in Vietnam?
Well, first of all, it's not strictly a capital investment in that you're not exactly investing in the stock exchange of Vietnam, or you're not investing in a fund. You're buying shares in an existing company that could be either entirely owned by Vietnamese shareholders or by Vietnamese and foreigners, or by foreigners alone. So the first thing is that, first of all, if you encounter anyone offering capital investments in the strict sense of the term, that is, on the stock exchange or on financial instruments here in Vietnam, watch out, seek legal advice, because a lot of financial operations are not allowed in Vietnam. That actually puts a huge limitation to the financial industry and the banking industry also in this country. It is meant to safeguard local investors, local consumers, as well as foreign ones. So watch out for that. The second thing is that there are industries where foreigners can invest and industries where foreigners cannot invest. Essentially, there is a catalog. This catalog lists...
Once again, thank you for this warning, Federico, and therefore let us go into more details of that. So, can foreign individuals and companies invest in any existing business in Vietnam by buying shares in it, or are there any restrictions?
The answer is that no, because there are restrictions. The restrictions are those that I was mentioning earlier. That is, there is essentially a catalog of the industries that foreigners can invest in. Essentially, there is a catalog of prohibited investments. For instance, I don't know, the arm industry, the military complex, media, pornography, drugs, all the shady things. You know, these things are not allowed for investments. They're not open for investments by foreigners. Then there are industries that are favored, either industries or locations. So depending on what province the target company is located in, you might have some incentives. These incentives, 99% of the times, if not 100% of the times, consist in tax breaks. So don't expect the Vietnamese government or local authorities to give you money for an investment, contrary to what happens in America or Europe with the Inflation Reduction Act and similar measures by the European Union and national governments. But indeed, you have some benefits of fiscal nature, of tax nature. The third category is that of businesses that are conditioned. What does it mean that a business is conditioned? It means that there are conditions for the investments, as the name suggests. Hence, you may not be allowed to have more than 50% of the shares, or you need a minimum share capital in that company. Or there are other limitations. It depends really on the industry. All the rest, so the fourth category, is the residual category, which luckily enough consists of basically 80 or probably more % of possible imaginable industries, and that is open for full investment by foreigners, meaning that they can invest up to 100% of the shares in an existing company here in this country.
This is great, and thank you for this explanation, because I don't believe that many people understand that business in Vietnam and Singapore can differ this much from the conditions we have here, like no limitations actually apply. It is up to you. It is your financial responsibility to take a responsible decision. However, therefore, can foreign investors exchange know-how for shares? How does this look in Vietnam?
The answer is yes, but the practicality is no. So the law on investments and the law on enterprises, which are the two main pieces of legislation regulating company law and investments, regardless of the origin of capitals, being them Vietnamese or foreign, they have been reformed, and they do allow for investments in exchange for investments in kind or for anything which is different from capital. Nevertheless, in my experience here in Vietnam, I have witnessed strong difficulties, severe difficulties in exchanging know-how for equity. I can give you an example if you want. It is that of a company that I have been assisting that invests all over the world. Their business model is to scout for suitable local partners in multiple jurisdictions, not necessarily in Asia, as I said, all over the world. If the business goes well, after my client provides these partners worldwide with its know-how, they exchange this know-how for a minority share. So they will get essentially, technically it's a dividend, but they call it a royalty on their knowledge that is infused in that specific matter. Now, this is permitted by the law here in Vietnam, but there are some contingent difficulties in terms of taxation, because you need to attach a value to the shares and you need to see the correspondent payment movement for the purchase of those shares. So the moment they liquidate the shares, the moment they close down the company or sell the shares to somebody else, there could be discrepancies that effectively result in really high taxes to pay. There should be an appraisal of the know-how And in general, it is essentially difficult. It is not there in the mentality yet to conduct these types of operations that in other jurisdictions like America, the European Union, Singapore, etc., are pretty much plain vanilla, but not so much here.
Thank you for that again. And if we're building this picture of how to invest, do mergers and acquisitions in Vietnam, can you just, by summing up as the last questions, tell us about some practical legal aspects that the foreigners should consider when thinking about investing and doing some sort of mergers and acquisitions in Vietnam?
Well, first of all, I would need to repeat very briefly what I said in the very beginning, that is, we need to see what kind of investment it is, whether it is a financial investment or whether it is an industrial investment, whether it is the purchase of shares in an existing company. Then the 4 types of businesses, namely forbidden, restricted, conditioned, or all the rest, which means allowed. So these 2 things first. Then the aspects related to the protection of intellectual property rights. That is, once you invest in a company here, are you providing the company with your name, with your intellectual property rights, your patents, your trademarks, etc.? Are these intellectual property rights protected in Vietnam or not yet? By whom? By the existing partner or so your future partners in the company here? Where is the company located in Vietnam? Do you want to change offices, etc.? Corporate governance, who's going to have the power to actually conduct business, day-to-day operations? You need to have in Vietnam, unlike other jurisdictions, you need to have a local legal representative. And by local legal representative, I mean also a foreigner that, however, legally resides in Vietnam. So if you are the investor and you live in America or Poland or anywhere else, you cannot hold that position in a Vietnamese company because you're not legally resident here. And obtaining a work permit in Vietnam is a bit cumbersome, etc., etc. We'll not go into the details, but that is also very important. So corporate governance and intellectual property rights are the other 2 aspects that I would consider at first. And also another aspect that I would consider is that of potential legal conflicts with existing shareholders. Suppose I go back to the example that I gave of the client of mine that intended to purchase shares, minority shares in an existing company here. They found out after conducting a due diligence through us, through my firm, that the target company was not established by one single partner as they thought, but there were other shareholders, and the other shareholders did not necessarily agree on the transfer of shares to our client. So, but the company was already there and the know-how had already been transferred. So moving in advance, preparing before things are set and avoiding that local players have the ball entirely in their hands is crucial from the very early stages of any operation of this kind.
Thank you so much for that. And for more on intellectual property rights and how it is being protected in Singapore, we'll see Federico after the break. Thank you and see you soon.
Oye, Lily dice que AT&T le da a todos las mejores ofertas.
Minus the air quotes.
Las mejores ofertas.
No need to wink. Others say they give everyone a deal, but not everyone gets the best deal.
Te lo dije, aquí las mejores ofertas son para todos con una variedad de planes.
You were right.
Is she always right?
Always.
En AT&T les damos a todos nuestras mejores ofertas en cada smartphone.
En esta era digital, las tarjetas de presentación de negocio son cosa del pasado. De hecho, la mayoría de las personas que las reciben las pierden en cuestión de minutos. La videotarjeta de negocios de NowMedia es un video de su negocio especialmente creado por nuestros expertos con toda su información de contacto, los productos y servicios de su negocio, y puede ser enviado de manera rápida utilizando su teléfono móvil. Cientos de negocios ya están viendo la diferencia. Llámenos hoy al 832-384-9588.
Tell me, are you looking to sell a house or buy a home? Hi, I'm Michelle Briggs, and your real estate needs are my priority. With over 2 decades worth of experience within the real estate industry, I know I can help. Whether you're selling a house and moving on to the next chapter or buying a home to create generational wealth for your family, I am the realtor for you. Call me now at 713-256-5465 and let me handle all of your real estate needs.
Welcome back after the break, and again with me Federico Vasoli, the Italian advocate, attorney who is working in Vietnam, and we are now following into the topic of intellectual rights and how they are being protected in Vietnam. And Federico, tell us, what's the model? So what do we think when we think about protecting intellectual rights in Vietnam? Because probably China that comes into our mind is the bad example of the good example, or the other way around, meaning China is not really very famous, it's rather infamous for not protecting the intellectual property rights. So imagine we do have important property rights, we want to invest in Vietnam, what should we be paying attention to? The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Natalia. It's a very broad topic, but to oversimplify, China definitely has a bad name in intellectual property rights protection. On the other hand, it is very true that China, over the past few years, has implemented a number of norms and has enforced them for the protection of intellectual property rights, whether locally owned or foreign owned. So China has come a long way, and whilst there are still major complaints, especially from tech giants, based on the alleged theft of know-how, of software, etc. Other things that affect primarily Europeans, such as trademark protection, etc., they have been tackled by the Chinese authorities. A caveat, I have not worked in China for a few years now, so I do not really have sensitivity over how the situation is like now. Now, Vietnam is very similar to China in many ways, but it is a completely different country on other aspects. And now it is definitely ahead under various considerations when it comes to a comparison between China and Vietnam. But essentially, the way you protect your intellectual property rights here is the following. You need to register here. You need to conduct preliminary searches in this jurisdiction, in Vietnam, and have your rights protected directly here, even if Vietnam is part to the so-called Madrid system, the Madrid system being the de facto international standard for the extension of existing registered intellectual property rights from one jurisdiction to the other. In plain words, you have a trademark that is registered in Italy, you can extend the protection of that trademark from Italy to Vietnam because both parties signed the relevant treaties and are part of this system called the Madrid the Madrid system. Regardless of that, Vietnam tends to be on the nationalistic side when it comes to protection of rights. That also applies to marriages, for instance, to the notification of foreign sentences, judicial acts, etc., etc. So it is, I would strongly recommend to apply for registration directly here after conducting a thorough examination on whether your prospective rights would infringe on somebody else's rights in this country. That also has to do with trade names that are used in this country. And I can give you a really relevant example. I have a client that is in the pharmaceutical industry. It's an important company from Italy. They set up a company in Vietnam, not directly, but through a locally trusted partner. That was a big mistake in my view. I did not advise them on this, but essentially what they did was they found somebody that they trusted that ticked all the boxes in their view. They asked them to set up a company using their trademark as the company's name. So imagine the company, imagine the trademark is Federico, and the Vietnamese partner established a company here in Vietnam called Federico Vietnam Limited, something like that. The agreement was that if operations were successful in Vietnam, eventually the trademark, the Federico trademark, would be transferred from the Vietnamese company to the Italian one. And both parties agreed. So mind you, this is very important. Both private parties agreed on the transfer of the ownership of the trademark. What was the problem? Well, the problem was that the National Office of Intellectual Property Rights actioned an opposition to the transfer of this trademark because of the risk of confusion among the people, among consumers, among the public, between the trade name of the company, Federico Vietnam Limited, and the trademark, Federico, that would then be owned solely by the Italians. So we should have opposed this objection, but evidently it would have been overly expensive, overly complicated, and we didn't do it because the Italian company trusts their Vietnamese partners here. But still, you see how dangerous, how convoluted the system is, even when the parties agree. Suppose that the parties did not agree, it would have been even worse.
So basically, what you are saying is that in any event of trying to invest in Vietnam and having an established trademark or any other property right, you would rather encourage everybody to first have good legal representation, second, run a detailed research on what's going on that, third, have a written contract that stipulates everything, and fourth, double check with the authorities. Is it the proper way to do it? Is it the proper way to think about investing and then following upon your intellectual property rights in Vietnam?
Yes, it is definitely the right approach, but I would add a point 0 before point 1, which is if you're really interested in doing anything here, regardless of the outcome, so you might eventually decide not to do business in Vietnam, please proceed with protecting your intellectual property rights as the first thing that you do in this country, because it takes time, it is complicated, and it doesn't cost that much after all. So you are spending some money, perhaps for nothing if you eventually don't do anything, but you definitely save yourself, you save your rights, you save also the expectation of your stakeholders, your clients, your partners, your suppliers, your shareholders back home. So do that in advance. Conduct a search on whether you can indeed protect your rights here, and if so, do it immediately. And then what happens, happens, but at least you are protected. At least you have some assets in your hand that you can use for the future.
And then, Federico, how I understand it, you have a lot of cases like that, but as everything, that when people don't agree, things end up in the court, right? So tell me, is it rather a court or arbitration? How are then these things being solved when this sort of disaster, because let me speak in these terms of infringement of the intellectual property rights. So when and what are the further legal steps, legal actions when this sort of a disaster happens?
Well, the legal actions are very difficult. That is, in the case that I mentioned earlier, the subject that was involved, the entity that was involved, was the National Office of Intellectual Property Rights. And that is a public authority, so you have to reply to the authority and follow a specific procedure in Vietnam, in Vietnamese. So in that case, there is no lawsuit, but there is an interaction between the public authority and you as an applicant or as a claimant. In case of a dispute between two private parties, then you need to trigger an enforcement team. What is an enforcement team? It is the team within a law firm that is in charge of effectively protect your intellectual property rights when somebody else infringes on them, be they trademarks. I use the all-encompassing term intellectual property rights for patents, trademarks, copyrights, etc. Design, blah, blah, blah. So essentially you need to resort to that, because going abroad for arbitration or even for ordinary legal proceedings could be quite cumbersome when it comes to enforcing a favorable sentence or award in Vietnam, because Vietnam's recognition of foreign sentences and arbitral awards, international arbitral awards, is really, really difficult, is almost impossible when it comes to sentences. So my recommendation is that you use the right enforcement team, and that if you have a contract in place or whatever other legal document pertaining your rights, you go for arbitration in Vietnam. So my recommendation, to answer your question about ordinary lawsuits and arbitration or other forms of alternative dispute resolution, is if you are in Vietnam, try and go for arbitration or mediation in Vietnam. And if not, option number 2, go to court in Vietnam. Option number 3, go abroad. But try and play in the local arena if you can. I know it sounds difficult, it can be frustrating, etc., but it is the most effective way to protect yourself.
Federico, I can hear, and I know by our previous interaction on our podcast, when we had an entire series with you, which is still to be watched, named Global
Absolutely.
Business with Federico Vasoli. And Federico has been sharing a lot of his knowledge and expertise on that in different fields and aspects of doing business in Vietnam and Singapore. I can see that intellectual property rights is something that plays an important role in your practice. And please tell our audience how people can get hold of you.
The audience can get hold of me primarily through my website, dmtv.com. That's dmtv.com, or through LinkedIn or any other major social network, but I prefer to use LinkedIn under my name and surname, Federico Vasoli, and we will reply to your questions. Or else we can do. Otherwise, your viewers can go to your page, LMI, and hit me up from there.
Thank you, Federico, for that. I am looking forward to our next piece that I am going to do with you after the break, which is going to be about limited liability partnership in Singapore and how to invest in that. But for now, Let me invite you and the audience to a little break.
Oye, Lily dice que AT&T le da a todos las mejores ofertas.
Minus the air quotes.
Las mejores ofertas.
No need to wink. Others say they give everyone a deal, but not everyone gets the best deal.
Te lo dije, aquí las mejores ofertas son para todos con una variedad de planes.
You were right.
Is she always right?
Always.
En AT&T les damos a todos nuestras mejores ofertas en cada smartphone.
Hey, are you a small business owner that's struggling to double or triple your revenue and profits? My name is Michael Rager. I'm your business guide with Teach Your Business to Fish. Our success operating system will help you double or triple your profits every 2 to 3 years while actually maintaining some semblance of a home life. Call us at 713-201-5559 and we'll help you become a real success.
En esta era digital, las tarjetas de presentación de negocio son cosa del pasado. De hecho, la mayoría de las personas que las reciben las pierden en cuestión de minutos. La videotarjeta de negocios de NowMedia es un video de su negocio especialmente creado por nuestros expertos con toda su información de contacto, los productos y servicios de su negocio, y puede ser enviado de manera rápida utilizando su teléfono móvil. Cientos de negocios ya están viendo la diferencia. Llámenos hoy al 832-384-9588.
¿Estás cansado de la inseguridad, la situación económica y de ya sabes quién? ¿Te gustaría salir de México y emigrar a Estados Unidos? Soy Edmundo Treviño y quiero compartir contigo más de 20 años como inmigrante emprendedor en Estados Unidos. Sígueme en todas mis redes sociales para que juntos logremos ese gran sueño de emigrar y lograr conquistar el mercado americano.
Hello and welcome back after the break. Again, this is Legal Talk with Natalia and Natalia, and I am here with Federico Vasoli, the Italian a lawyer who is practicing in Singapore, in Vietnam. We did 2 pieces today with describing situation in Vietnam, and now we are coming back to Singapore. And the topic that we are going to be covering now is the limited liability partnership. And can you tell us what's this legal instrument about in Singapore, and why does it make it so interesting?
Well, Natalia, thank you for your question. This is something that really excites me recently. It is an instrument that we have discovered, well, it's been existing since forever, but that we have been using actively only recently, and we're really happy, and we would encourage those of you that are willing to establish partnerships worldwide, not just in Singapore, to give it a thought. It's a good solution. So as the name suggests, it is a partnership. So it is not a company. You do not have shares in it. You have a percentage of the partnership. And it has limited liability, which is great, because normally in many civil law jurisdictions, you have something similar. In Italy, for instance, I'm thinking about the società in accomandita, perhaps. It is vaguely similar to the partnership. But in many instances, you do not have the privilege of limited liability. In Singapore and other jurisdictions, of course, Singapore is not the only one that is offering this solution. A limited liability partnership, as I said, is not a company, but it offers limited liability, which is one of the characteristics of companies since their inception. Why is it interesting? Because it could be used in a very flexible way due to the nature of its taxation, which is so-called pass-through. But we can discuss these details at a later stage in this conversation. First, I wanted to give you the definition.
So this is actually fascinating for me as a lawyer. People think that you can protect yourself only by creating a separate legal entity that then bears all the responsibility within it. And having something that doesn't require setting up a company, and let me remind the viewers, setting up a company requires registration, requires separate accounting, requires separate legal advice on that. So requires creating a totally new legal entity, which then has its representatives, which then has its management, that might require some more employees. So honestly, what it makes it, all in all, it's making it quite expensive. I understand that the construct you are now describing is also cheaper for the investors. Am I right?
Yes, you're broadly right, even though obviously you can manage an LLP, a limited liability partnership, as if it were a company, but you could also run your own individually owned business as if it were a company, as a sole proprietor. So the sky is the limit, obviously. But yes, you're essentially right. It is definitely a cheaper option. And it is more flexible. I think that the key element is that whilst offering limited liability, so reducing risks and financial exposure significantly, it allows for great flexibility that might lead the partners in the limited liability partnership to eventually decide and set up a proper company. So it could be seen as a trial instrument to then decide what to do when you grow up. Why do I say that it offers flexibility? Well, because of the nature of this instrument. That is, you have partners that join and leave based on the rules that you set up upon setting up the LLP. It works really well, for instance, in firms, in accounting firms, law firms, etc. You have these partnerships regulations that allow for lawyers to, or accountants or whatever other professionals to, upon meeting certain criteria, have a stake, become partners in the firm, in the structure. And you also have similar mirroring obligations and criteria that make these partners leave upon certain occurrences happening. For instance, reaching a certain age. If you reach a certain age, then you're liquidated and you leave. And that is very flexible and very convenient, especially when you have a large group of people that come and go, The same is true for trial things. For instance, recently we have been assisting a pretty important online marketing company that wishes to test one of their customers. Essentially, one of these customers would like to partner up with them, set up an independent structure, and share the profits. My client is not entirely sure of this, and they say, why, as you rightly pointed out, Natalia, why should we go through the hassles of setting up a company, have big headaches, spend a lot of money when we don't know if we're actually going to continue working together in, say, 2, 3, 4, 6 months. Maybe it will end up in remaining friends, but not really enjoying working together any longer. Now, the partnership is a perfect tool for that. You do your business, you're taxable where the partners are. This is something that I might touch on later. And if things go well, the partnership could evolve. You could keep it as it is, of course, but it could evolve into becoming an actual company. And if things do not go well, it will be dissolved and that's it.
So, knowing what you have just said, who is this partnership, limited liability partnership for? Who will benefit from that most, and therefore with what sort of investment, what sort of business, what sort of company can actually look into this sort of legal idea?
I would say, first of all, large organizations of people that typically are set up in the shape of firms or foundations in certain countries where this is allowed. You have the Swiss foundations, for instance, for certain law firms. So if you have people that put together their knowledge and you want to set criteria for them to be able to join and leave, that is an optimal solution. On the other hand, any type of business really that wishes to have a trial test, a flexible, light instrument that allows them to test themselves, not just in Singapore. I would like to stress this thing, because the third beneficiary of the structure is the state. Why do I say that? The government. Why do I say that? Because the partners in a limited liability partnership are taxed where they are residents. So I don't know if you're a resident of Poland, Natalia, but let's assume that you are a resident of Poland and you want to set up a partnership with a partner of yours that is based in Texas. If you set up the LLP in Singapore, the profits will be shared in Poland for you and in Texas for your partner. They will not be taxed in Singapore. It's a pass-through organization. Of course, the LLP might have to pay duties and other types of taxes. But when it comes to income will be taxed where the partners are resident. So you don't need to, that is also something fantastic, which is you don't need to have headaches, thoughts about changing your tax status, about changing your tax residency and so on. Because for the time being, as long as you are a partner in the partnerships and you don't see the need of moving somewhere else or declaring profits in a foreign entity, etc., you simply pay taxes in your place of residency. You simply add the profits of the partnership to the other profits that you might have, to the rest of the income that you generate in that jurisdiction. This is just fantastic, and it is also good for the place where you're resident, for the government, because it gets more money from you.
When you mention taxes, Federico, what comes to my mind always is really this threat of residency, because sometimes people have very complicated legal structures. Sometimes they look for ways where this sort of income is far more beneficially taxed. Then they look for another jurisdiction for another reason. They are also moving around, looking for ways to do taxes efficiently. I'm not saying avoiding taxes. Avoiding taxes is never a good way to do things. However, what then comes into our minds is the tax fraud. The construct you have now been describing is actually avoiding any threat of being suspected and charged for legal fraud, for tax fraud, in terms of any financial dealings with this sort of partnership. Am I right?
You're absolutely right. And by the way, for our American viewers, this is something that they should already be quite familiar with when it comes to LLCs, limited liability companies, especially those that are set up in states like Wyoming and Delaware, because the principle is exactly the same. Profits are, using the technical jargon, passed through. That is, they're passed through the shareholders in the case of LLCs in Wyoming or Delaware or other states in America. or the LLP in Singapore, they're passed through the shareholders or partners, and then the individual shareholders and partners are taxed wherever they're based on the income that they generate, including the income that comes from the partnership.
And before I invite you and the viewers into the break, I wanted you to tell us once again what you concentrate upon in your business, because we've been covering Vietnam. Now we have been through some investment ideas from the legal point of view in Singapore. What is your company mainly dealing with, and how is it best to get hold of you for those sort of information for a particular practice that people might be interested in implementing in Vietnam or Singapore?
Well, thank you for asking, Natalia. We do essentially three things. Number one is international business law in the jurisdictions that you mentioned, plus Malta and Italy. So we have offices in Singapore, Malta, and Vietnam. That's three, but I'm qualified in Italy, so we can do that as well. And international business law means legal opinions, contracts, registration of intellectual property rights, as we mentioned before the break, setting up of companies, companies administration, and corporate governance, all these things that we usually discuss. Number two is tax planning, asset protection, secondary passports, and secondary residencies. I would like to stress, and I'm proud to announce that our director in Singapore, Giacomo Merello, has just been appointed as Special Economic Envoy of Antigua and Barbuda, which is famously one of those countries that sell citizenship by investment. So that is another thing that we cover. And number three is fintech. Especially Giacomo, whom I mentioned, is an expert in crypto law, IoT law, fintech law, etc. When I mention that, I mean that we don't do hanky-panky stuff. I mean providing sound legal support to crypto projects, blockchain projects, etc. It means, for instance, applying for a crypto license for an exchange before the Monetary Authority of Singapore. It means, for instance, liaising with banks. It means, for instance, having all the right contracts in place so that an NFT can work according to the law without falling into notorious booby traps. So we take care of the fact that your investments and your setup of these things is fully compliant with the law.
And with that, let me invite everybody into the break, after which we will be discussing the last topic for today with Federico, which is a particularly interesting thing about pharmaceutical companies and pharmaceutical investment opportunities in Vietnam as seen by the lawyers. And now, let me invite you to the break, and we'll see you soon.
Hey, Lily says AT&T is giving everyone their best deals.
Minus the air quotes.
Best deals.
No need to wink. Others say they give everyone a deal, but not everyone gets the best deal.
Told you, the best deals are for everyone here, with a choice of plans.
You were right.
Is she always right?
Always.
At AT&T, we give everyone our best deals on every smartphone.
As a home or business owner, it can be tough to find a painting company that you can rely on. Look no further. Hi, I'm Courtney Hughes, owner of 360 Painting West Houston, your go-to painting company for residential and commercial needs. 360 Painting's mission is simple. We want to provide you with the highest quality finish and the best painting experience possible. Our company's residential and commercial painting services are founded on three core values. First, quality. We ensure the use of premium paints, high-quality finishes, and proven painting methods. Second, professionalism. We are committed to professional and responsive painting services. We coordinate and plan projects around your schedule and will treat your property with the utmost respect. And lastly, customer service. Your satisfaction is our #1 priority. So before laying a single brushstroke, we will make sure that we understand your vision for your home or office, and we'll do all that we can to paint that vision into reality. We strive to complete every project to your specifications, and we ensure professional, accountable, and reliable service from the first brushstroke to the last. So the next time that you need your home or business painted, give us a call for your free estimate at 713-829-1581.
En esta era digital, las tarjetas de presentación de negocio son cosa del pasado. De hecho, la mayoría de las personas que las reciben las pierden en cuestión de minutos. La videotarjeta de negocios de NowMedia es un video de su negocio especialmente creado por nuestros expertos con toda su información de contacto, los productos y servicios de su negocio y puede ser enviado de manera rápida utilizando su teléfono móvil. Cientos de negocios ya están viendo la diferencia. Llámenos hoy al 832-384-9588.
Welcome back after the break to meet with me, Natalia in Legal Talk with Natalia and Mac, and with Federico Vasoli for the last topic of today, which will be pharmaceutical companies in Vietnam. But before I do that, Federico, you are doing us a great pleasure of being here with us because it's getting somewhere late there. Tell us a little bit about your environment in Vietnam where you are now.
Well, it's almost midnight here. I'm still at the office, so it's not too late. It's not overly late. I sometimes go late and go to bed much later than this. I'm sure that our viewers have appreciated the many bloopers in my interventions, due probably to the late night recording, but it's not so bad. The environment, well, this is a meeting room in my office where I'm recording from. So welcome to my little world or not so little world in Hanoi.
A global world in Vietnam, and we're here in Houston, and it's really hot. In terms of well, we are in Fahrenheit, it's about 100 and more degrees. For the Europeans, it is like you and me, it is 39, which is a lot because the heat is here really hitting. Having said that, pharmaceuticals comes with the heat as well, because I understand a lot of people also try to use pharmaceuticals when they are facing very difficult weather conditions. And investing in pharmaceuticals, growing your business in this area in Vietnam. What can you tell us about it?
Well, before we jump into that, I have a technical question, which is whether you and the viewers can see me and hear me all right, because I had a moment where you cracked a little bit.
No,
so
always perfect.
Allow me to double check with you that is fine. Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. So, all right, brilliant. So to answer your question, well, the pharmaceutical industry, as everybody knows, is huge and entails massive investments, a lot of employment, a lot of intellectual property rights, innovations with it, establishment of new ventures, and so it is a blessing for a country to attract this type of players. And Vietnam, as a fast-growing Southeast Asian nation, is trying, like its competitors worldwide, not just in the region, to lure investments in this industry to come to its shores and set up factories, sell their drugs, etc. This is part of an ambitious plan, which is that of Resolution 29 of November 2022. So it's relatively recent. In legal eras, November 22 is very recent. This resolution is essentially a resolution that sets the ambitious goals for Vietnam's further industrialization and modernization, and it stresses the importance also of the pharmaceutical industry. So Vietnam aims at becoming a hub for it. It is an ambitious exercise that only few countries managed to pull through, because it involves several parties. It's not just the legislator and the government say, okay, we decide this, let's do it, let's implement it. It is not just in the hands of the private investors like pharmaceutical companies, and it is not just in the hand of consumers. So it is at least a three-party exercise that unfolds in decades. A new product, a new drug, is usually developed in 10, 15, 20 years and requires billions of dollars in investments and research. And I was reading some slides. I went recently to a beautiful event organized also by the Vietnam Investment Review and the pharma group of Eurocham, the European Chamber of Commerce here in Vietnam. The pharma group represents the largest pharmaceutical companies from Europe, but not just from Europe, also from America, including Pfizer, including Bayer, AstraZeneca, and all the other big names, Sanofi, blah, blah, blah. They gave some really staggering data, some inspiring data, and also what is required for a country to be successful in this. Now, Vietnam has, on paper, the potential for becoming a hub in the pharmaceutical industry. Why? Because it has a young population that is quite large. We're talking about a country of 100 million people, so you can conduct trials according to the law, of course, without compromising patients' health. You have geography. If you look at the map, Vietnam is fantastically well positioned in Southeast Asia. You have geopolitics. You have the whole world trying to lure Vietnam on their side. America, the West, China, neighbors. You have a skilled labor force. The Vietnamese are really, I admire especially the current generation of young Vietnamese because they are eager to study, they're eager to learn, they speak languages, they study hard. So you do have the potential for that. You have a country which is decently industrialized, and therefore the potential is there. So I'm quite optimistic about it.
You mentioned that Vietnam has recently passed this resolution number 29 of 2022. When I hear the word resolution, it seems like it's not a binding legal document within the state, but I understand that the political situation in Vietnam differs a little from what we are used to in the Western democracies. So what is actually a resolution? Who passes it on? And what sort of legal meaning it has, especially after listening to you when you said that it needs to establish long-term goals because it needs to protect investments long-term, probably for decades.
Well, the second bit of my answer earlier was referred specifically to the pharma industry because of how complex it is to develop new drugs and market them. In this conference that I attended that I mentioned earlier, it was said that 1 out of 10,000 molecules make it to the market and only 1 in 3 is actually successful business-wise. So that means that an investment in any country must be a long-term one. And as for your question about the nature of resolutions, well, yes, there are secondary level types of pieces of legislation in Vietnam. They are essentially decisions from the government. So the name resolution may be a pretty strong translation from the Vietnamese original, but it is not a piece of law. That's absolutely correct. So it is not a law, it is not an amendment to the Constitution or anything. It is a decision by the government to set some goals and try and achieve them as fast as possible and as efficiently as possible.
And Federico, you have just said that Vietnam has all these beautiful things that can make it interesting for investments, especially in pharmaceuticals. You said that the geographical position, the political climate, the opportunities, the fact that the potential young employees will be speaking languages, which will make it easier for people to be together and to work together, to overcome also the cultural barriers. Now tell us, please, what are the obstacles?
Well, in the presentation that was given by the pharma group, so I'm quoting their words, they're not mine, they listed 10 critical factors for creating favorable conditions for the pharmaceutical industry, especially for technological transfers from countries like America and member states of the European Union, where you have a strong pharmaceutical industry that says, okay, we believe in Vietnam, we go full force to Vietnam. Now, out of these 10, I would take at least 2, probably 4, maybe 5. The others I'm a bit skeptical about. Let us go through them very quickly. Rule of law is established and enforced. Well, I'm not so sure about that, with all due respect. That is, the legal system in Vietnam is highly contradictory. It has loopholes. The legislator knows that. A good message is that the legislator and top government officials often meet with foreign players in order to listen to their remarks. So there is room for improvement, but we're not there yet. The positive thing is that, yes, there is room for improvement and the government is willing to do something about it. Political stability and transparent economic governance. Well, political stability, of course. Vietnam is so far very stable. We don't know about the future, of course, but not just political stability, society is very stable. You don't hear of ethnic, religious, or whatever other types of divisions and violences in Vietnam. When it comes to transparent economic governance, we have to get there. Trusted partner adhering to high ethical standards, I would say you can find some, so it may be difficult to source for these partners, but you can find them. Viable and accessible local market, you definitely have it. Appropriate capital markets, well, Vietnam is not exactly a rich country, but it is growing and it can source capitals from outside. It relies partly also to foreign aid. Japan, the US and other countries, the European Union, give a lot of money, billions of dollars to Vietnam, so capitals are not really a problem in my view. Innovation-friendly environment with sound IP rights. We talked about IP rights before. There is room for improvement again. Proper access to information. I believe that can be done considering the favorable attitude of the government vis-a-vis listening to foreign players. Adherence to high regulatory standards. We can get there. Skilled workforce, we do have it. Clear economic development priorities, I think they're there. That is, the problem that I see is of budget nature. That is, would you allocate resources to pharmaceutical research, or would you allocate the same resources to, I don't know, building new airports or improving hospitals or schools or roads? That is a political decision. I do not know if the government has made its mind yet vis-a-vis this asset allocation problem, this conundrum, but I believe it has, to be frank, because if you read Resolution 29, it goes in that direction. So all in all, it doesn't tick all the boxes, but it ticks a few and the others could be ticked.
Federico, thank you so much. Before we say our final goodbye today, and thank you for participating in the show, can you please tell us what's the best way to reach out to you in terms of any questions, any legal problems, and please let us know the details of how it will be working best for you to get your potential clients.
You can reach me on major social networks, preferably LinkedIn. Look my name up, Federico Vasoli, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, other social networks, you can find me. Or my website, themtvglobal.com. There was a blooper in the previous segment of the show. It is themtvglobal.com, themtvglobal.com. Or, of course, your website, Natalia, so lmipodcast.com, where you can watch not just this episode and the other episodes with yours truly, but also the other episodes of the Lawyers and Mediators International podcast.
Thank you so much, Federico. Thank you for your time at midnight in Vietnam. And I will
007 now, 007.
So we'll be now taking off, and thank you so much for being with us. Thank you for sharing your knowledge about Vietnam, Singapore, and the legal aspects of the industry there. And thank you for our listeners and viewers for wanting to be with us today. And we'll see you in the next legal talk with Natalia and Mark. For everybody who has been wondering where Mark is back because he's been in the court, and he'll join us for the next episode. Thank you for today. Have a lovely evening, and goodbye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
This has been a NowMedia television feature presentation. All rights reserved.
Oye, Lily dice que AT&T le da a todos las mejores ofertas.
Minus the air quotes.
Las mejores ofertas.
No need to wink. Others say they give everyone a deal, but not everyone gets the best deal.
Te lo dije, aquí las mejores ofertas son para todos con una variedad de planes.
You were right.
Is she always right?
Always.
En AT&T les damos a todos nuestras mejores ofertas en cada smartphone.
Hey, are you a small business owner that's struggling to double or triple your revenue and profits? My name is Michael Rager. I'm your business guide with Teach Your Business to Fitch. Our success operating system will help you double or triple your profits every 2 to 3 years while actually maintaining some semblance of a home life. Call us at 713-201-5559 and we'll help you become a real success.
En esta era digital, las tarjetas de presentación de negocio son cosa del pasado. De hecho, la mayoría de las personas que las reciben las pierden en cuestión de minutos. La videotarjeta de negocios de NowMedia es un video de su negocio especialmente creado por nuestros expertos con toda su información de contacto, los productos y servicios de su negocio y puede ser enviado de manera rápida utilizando su teléfono móvil. Cientos de negocios ya están viendo la diferencia. Llámenos hoy al 832-384-9588.
¿Estás cansado de la inseguridad, la situación económica y de ya sabes quién? ¿Te gustaría salir de México y emigrar a Estados Unidos?